Welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham-Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
In the late 1990s, historian Richard M. Dolan was studying U.S. Cold War strategy when it became increasingly clear to him that, quote, by the mid-1940s, America's intelligence apparatus had reason to believe that there were artifacts in the skies that did not originate from America, Russia, Germany, or any other country. These objects violated some highly sensitive military airspace and did not appear to be natural phenomena, close quote. So the aerial mystery had to be of great concern to national security. By 2000, Richard released the first of an acclaimed 2-volume UFOs in the National Security State that includes hundreds of declassified military base records about UFOs intruding into the sensitive airspace above military bases outside the control of our best military technologies. The first volume begins in 1941 when Foo Fighter lights and round silver discs were reported by pilots fighting in World War II. By July 28, 1952, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was asking, quote, what does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Close quote. And then 2 years later, on July 11, 1954, the UK's Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowding of the Royal Air Force Fighter Command said, quote, I am convinced that these objects do exist and that they are not manufactured by any nation on Earth, close quote. And those UFO intrusions have continued around the world to this day. But what exactly are UFOs? Richard Dolan writes, quote, not only must we ask what constitutes proof, but who is authorized to deem it so? This is not so easy to determine. Certainly, an acknowledgement of aliens would have to come from a major spokesperson or official culture, the president perhaps. The matter is more political than scientific. UFO evidence derived from a grassroots level can never survive its inevitable conflict with official culture. 50 years of failure by the public to get facts and truth from government agencies has borne this out. An acknowledgement about the reality of the UFO phenomenon will only occur when the official culture deems it worthwhile or necessary to make it public. But don't hold your breath. As a result, the easiest thing to do with UFO evidence is to ignore it, which is what most people do, close quote. In contrast, Robert Bigelow, who is founder and president of Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas, Nevada, a company that manufactures and develops expandable space station modules, Mr. Bigelow made this assessment of the situation in a rare public appearance with news reporter George Knapp on Coast to Coast AM radio in March of 2013. Bigelow stated, quote, so what I do is I try to distinguish the difference between confirmation and disclosure. To me, there is a very crucial difference between the way I choose to use those words. And that is, confirmation to me means simply the acknowledgement that the phenomena exists, that it is real, getting the truth out. ETs really do exist. And that's it. You draw the line and you stop right there. That it is real. Confirmation is not disclosure. It does not require and mean that details need to be immediately flooded out regarding craft and occupants and all kinds of things. I also see that to me, confirmation is in process. I think this is an ongoing effort now, and that it is accelerating. I think it is by the phenomena itself, because the UFO exhibitions continue, and involvement by the phenomena in people's lives continue. The phenomena does not stop. Close quote. So is disclosure a useless concept now? There is an alternative paradigm to move forward. An event needs to be seen as a non-threatening means to maintain what is called the orderly functions of the body politic, while admitting that we are not alone. Confirmation acknowledges that the UFO phenomenon is real and not human. Confirmation is a crucial and important conceptual distinction from disclosure of the facts, whatever they might be, as called for by disclosure advocates. A consultant to the CIA, Kit Green, MD, argues that confirmation trumps disclosure because, quote, disclosure is a political impossibility, close quote. After this short break, joining us on Phenomena Radio will be historian and author Richard Dolan to talk about his perspective of the future. Are we headed to disclosure of facts about ETs and alien technologies by this and other governments? Or is simple confirmation that ETs and alien technologies exist, as Robert Bigelow said, the more likely first step away from our government's phony policies of denial since World War II?
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live on KGRA DB with Bentwaters experiencer John Burroughs and Emmy award-winning investigative journalist and Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe. Tonight's special guest Richard Dolan will join the show right after these messages. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio.
At MSC Cruises, we believe life should be measured in moments, not minutes. The moment you set eyes on the perfect blue of the Caribbean, the moment you breathe in the sweet, salty air of freedom, the moment you let out the sound of true happiness. Find your moments aboard one of the newest members of our fleet. Introducing MSC Divina, now sailing the Caribbean year-round from Miami. Contact your travel advisor or visit msccruises.com today.
Call Holiday Maker Travel toll-free at 877-642-4308. Check out their website at holidaymakertravel.com or email them at info@holidaymakertravel.com to reserve your MSC cruise today. Did you know that there is another way to listen to all of the great UFO paranormal talk radio on KGRA while on the go? Well, the KGRA has partnered with TalkStream Live to bring you a call-to-listen feature from any phone. Simply dial 605-562-4206 on your cell phone. No smartphone, apps, or internet needed. No extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Add the number to your contacts and dial hands-free. Listen to the KGRA from any phone, anywhere, anytime. Just dial 605-562-4206. That's 605-562-4206. Making it even easier to get the talk radio you want from TalkStream Live and your KGRA digital broadcast station.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk.
Yes, there have been crash retrievals of UFOs, and we have to really hunt, we have to research, we have to do our work really well.
Always has been, always will be. KGRA, the planet.
Thanks so much for staying with us, everyone. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live with John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe. And tonight's interview with very special guest, UFO historian and author Richard Dolan. To start tonight's interview, here's John Burroughs. John?
Thanks, Race. Richard, first of all, I would like to take the time to thank you for coming on today. And the first question is, what's your take on Bigelow's take about confirmation trumps disclosure?
Thank you, John and Linda. I'm delighted to be on this program, by the way. Relating to the idea of confirmation versus disclosure, I'm not really convinced that this is an actual distinction that is a significant one. My own take on disclosure for many years has been, well, I guess I have a love-hate relationship with the whole idea of talking about disclosure, because part of me always feels that it's a very premature conversation. But I do think it's a necessity in terms of having a democratic, Republican type of society in which government is responsive to people. I think that we don't ever want to lose sight of the fact that we need a political system that is responsive to us on this most important of topics, UFOs. But the distinction that confirmation is somehow, like as is stated by Robert Bigelow when Linda was giving the intro, I've listened to Stephen Bassett talk countless times about disclosure, and frankly, his definition of disclosure is almost identical to what Robert Bigelow called confirmation. I see no distinction between those. I don't know if I agree with that distinction of that definition of disclosure, but the fact is that Bassett, for a decade or more, has said all disclosure is to him is an acknowledgement that there is a reality, and what the nature of that reality is would be up for grabs, and we would have to have a discussion. My own position on disclosure is not radically different from that. So in other words, it's very similar to what Bigelow was saying, and I think it's ridiculous to assume that any political authority, let's say the president, is going to be able or willing to come out with all the information that is known right away about this phenomenon. I wrote a book about it. I think I'm the only person to write a book on this topic to this date so far, AD After Disclosure, and that doesn't make me any more an expert than you or Linda, but I've given it thought, and my sense is that this is a topic that you really going to have a hard time giving a little bit of information out. That's the whole thing. I mean, if the U.S. president were put into a position where there's confirmation, and I assume, by the way, when Robert Bigelow's talking about confirmation, the real question is by whom. So I assume by a responsible political authority. So if the president, let's just say, were to give confirmation, the real question is, how do you give a confirmation and just leave it at that? That's an impossibility. This is why the whole topic is such a pariah to this day within the national security and media nexus, because they don't know how. They absolutely have no way of broaching this matter even a little tiny bit by giving it the tiniest shred of credibility without opening up Pandora's box. If the president were to say, it has come to my attention that there is a reality to this anomalous phenomena that doesn't appear to come from our civilization, he can't just walk away and go on a 6-month vacation, though he might want to. The fact is that there will be thousands of follow-up questions that will come on like a tidal wave. Question number one, people are not going to be satisfied with that little answer. They're going to ask, who are these beings? What do we know about them? Does one honestly think that you can have confirmation, as Robert Bigelow says, and then not get into all the public policy questions that are going to be coming up in the aftermath? Question number two, how have you kept this secret for 50, 60, 70 years? That's not going to be an easy one to answer. There are people in our society who have, they're obedient to authority. They'll accept anything the government says, but there are many people who are not going to just roll over, and they're going to want to ask questions. How did you keep this secret? What does that say about the nature of the corruption of our political institution, of the corruption of our scientific and academic institutions? Why were they able to keep silent all this time? Our media, all of that's going to come out, and that will inevitably lead to questions, probably within the first, day of the structure of the black budget aspects of the secrecy. This is not just going to go away, and that'll come in with all the questions that people will inevitably ask about secret technology programs, and abductions and everything else that one can answer. This is all going out there. And
Richard?
Yeah.
I just had a discussion with Grant Cameron in Los Angeles at the Conscious Life Expo on this very issue, in which Grant was saying, one of the first questions, what about animal mutilations? And law enforcement says it's by creatures from outer space. And this goes directly to something Grant was talking about just recently, that he understands that inside the Obama administration with John Podesta right now in February of 2016, that they are actually thinking that what they want is to confirm the presence of an alien, we'll call it a technology and intelligence. And here's the quote from Grant. But the government doesn't want its fingerprints on this confirmation. And Grant said to me, what are they thinking?
Exactly.
How is it possible that the government that has controlled all of the lies since World War II would think that they can now shove this out in this last year of Barack Obama and, quote unquote, keep the fingerprints of the government off of this information?
That's the true impossibility. You quoted Kit Green earlier saying that disclosure is a political impossibility. Well, it actually is. And this is why. There's no easy way. There's no politically possible way within our current paradigm for them to give this secret up. It opens way too much up to question. And to say nothing of, and I've been harping on this for years, but let me just mention it now. I believe that this will directly affect our global energy paradigm, if not within the first 5 minutes, then within the first 5 years. Because even if this comes out, people will realize that whatever these objects are using, it's not petroleum to get from point A to point B. And whatever the answer is in terms of their energy paradigm, the most important obstacle that we're going to overcome is in realizing that there is another option, whatever that is. And it's going to happen. It will portend the end of the petroleum hydrocarbon era in terms of energy as our predominant source. I believe that. And that's a massive transformation. So all of this is going to come up, and it's going to be like this an avalanche that will just be an out of control scenario. And where the power structure will be at the end of it, I don't think anyone can tell. So I think it is a political impossibility. And to think that you can have confirmation without disclosure, I don't even understand what that distinction. I think it's a false distinction, because the way that Bigelow was framing disclosure, it seems to me, it's not how I thought of disclosure. It's not how Stephen Bassett talked about disclosure. I don't know maybe Stephen Greer, for all I know, but I don't really know what his exact position on this is. But who among us is ever going to think that the government is going to be truthful in any voluntary way when they talk about this phenomenon? Certainly not me. So, to say that, disclosure is the government like giving up everything to help, tell the people. I don't know who thinks of that, such a thing. It just seems like it's like a straw man.
Well, Richard, what I wanted to bring up, don't you think in some ways confirmation's already happened with all the documents that have been declassified, and people are just choosing to ignore what certain people are saying? It's
confirmation by whom? I mean, I was kind of happy to hear Linda quote something I wrote almost 20 years ago, that very first, from the introduction of my first book, talking about that. And it reminded me, my position really hasn't, and that matter changed a whole lot in almost 2 decades on the matter of disclosure. That is, it's a political act. It's more political than scientific. You're right, John. The information's out there. It's been out, in my opinion, in terms of FOIA documents for generations now. It's been there. And yet it doesn't get any forward motion. And the question is why? And it's because it's a political matter. Somehow the political structure in our world, which is creeping more and more toward fascism every day, every week, is able to maintain control over the public discourse sufficiently that this doesn't get raised. The information's there. In that sense, confirmation's there. But the real important issue, as I see it, is confirmation or disclosure by whom.
And Richard, isn't there a puzzle here in this regard? The unidentified aerial phenomena report by DI-55 to the MOD that is often referred to as Project Condign, 460 pages that were classified UK eyes only in 2000. About the whole report is about some kind of frequency that is emanated from these unidentified aerial phenomena, as the UK report says, that can manipulate human minds and damage human tissues. And in these 460 pages, there are graphs of human bodies and there are frequencies given. But the truth about whether we're dealing with terahertz or something else emanating from UFO technology is quite carefully and skillfully hidden in those 460 pages. Now, John Burroughs and I and others, ever since this was unclassified in 2006, and none of us knew. It was unclassified completely under the radar, and it was only with John facing heart problems, perhaps death, and Nick Pope had access to someone or information that it existed and got that report to us not long before John had to have open heart surgery, and it may or may not have helped with information. But what has happened since our making it public around 2013 to 2014 is that there is one hand clapping out there. Nobody seems to even be reading, absorbing, and understanding this amazing 460-page report from the UK.
I totally agree, and it's really important that people recognize the crucial work that John did in first of all, in reading through that report and seeing just why it was so important. And John, everyone owes you that. It's a very, very important confirmation, I think is precisely the right word, by UK intelligence in acknowledging the reality of what we would call a UFO phenomenon and talking, at least in the information that's available to us, in some detail about it, not all the detail we want, but enough to confirm it's real. So this is important. Now, that's not the only document where there's confirmation, but it's one of the best ones. And we need to keep hammering away at this in the public domain. But again, I think confirmation doesn't trump disclosure because, as you just mentioned, we've got the sound of one hand clapping. So the only way, I think, to resolve this kind of schizophrenia that we have in our society, this, in other words, recognition of an official truth and then an actual truth, the truth we're supposed to believe, and then the truth that everyone sort of realizes is the case, is by getting a disclosure. I guess let's just use the word, a formal political authority that is responsive to the people, to acknowledge this so that we can then have an intelligent public conversation that includes everyone and hopefully make some forward motion on this. As it is right now, we've got the wheel is spinning and it's not going anywhere because the whole system's broken. And that's a sign that we've lost control. The people have lost control of the system. And I've really come to the feeling, I mean, I can look at the UFO phenomenon in a scientific manner and I can recognize that I want to know what the truth is, but I'll be honest with you. I'm less interested in knowing the truth about the UFO phenomenon in its entirety than I am in doing so in the context of having a free society and a government that's responsive to me. And I don't want to get disclosure, in other words, as a serf within a global totalitarian system. I have no interest in that. I do have an interest in obtaining a disclosure from a government that owes me and you and all of us the obligation of telling the truth. That's what I want. Otherwise, what are we here for? So the point is to get disclosure. I talk to people frequently enough who say, well, we don't really need the government. Why do we need them? We know what the truth is. Wrong. That's not really the point. Unless you just don't care about living in a society where you have some sense of sovereignty and where you have control over your life and when your government is responsive to you. If you don't care, then fine. I do care, and I think most of us do when we stop to think about it. So I think on that basis, disclosure is really important and should – and
Richard, right to the heart of what you are bringing up, the schizophrenia, unless there is a formal acknowledgement by our government, the UK, let's say the allies of World War II, and the rest of the world becomes included in, we're not alone, there are other intelligences, they have advanced technologies, they have been interacting with this planet for not just a century, but hundreds, thousands, millions of years. Once that is said, then the scientists suddenly are freed to do actual public investigation of phenomena and the energy sources, and then it could be applied to commercial research and application in our civilian societies. And to me, that is one of the most startling and corrupt aspects, is that you and I and others know that there is this whole black underbelly to this over the last 50 to 60 years of corporations that have made trillions of dollars on back engineering ET technology. And we are now at a century where global warming is going to be perhaps the biggest national security threat. The Department of Defense is already acknowledging that, and that the energy systems in these advanced technologies could apply and save us if they could become public.
Very excellent points and well said. I completely agree with that. And but it's a sense of our future being held hostage by what? People wanting to follow the CYA rule because they're afraid of being outed on a secret that they've participated in for generations and indeed a whole human lifetime. They're afraid of political blowback. I once received an email from a man who certainly he talked the talk of a real insider, whether he was or not, and said, I read your book, AD After Disclosure, and he said, I feel that you underestimated the fear that those of us on the inside have about disclosure. He said, look, no one is ever going to participate and help this along unless they are absolutely 1,000% sure that they're not going to be prosecuted by the public coming after them with torches and pitchforks, essentially wanting to imprison them for criminality. He said, unless there's absolute guarantees, and he said, I don't know how such guarantees can ever be, made realistic. He said, you're not going to find insiders willing to stick their neck out for this. And so I think that's one problem. And then the other problem simply is even, I think, the higher ups who probably, I do believe that there are individuals who have a very full understanding of the reality. I would be shocked if there weren't, and I assume that there are. And I think we can all assume, those of us who study this, that they recognize that this is a highly disruptive revelation, this UFO ET anomalous reality that's there. And I just think that, again, as Kit Green said, it's a political impossibility. But the thing is, it's going to happen anyway. There's no way, it's like the little boy who puts his finger in the dike to keep the water coming up, and here comes the ocean, here comes the tidal wave. It's only a matter of time. We're going through such dramatic transformations in our society. I have felt this for years, that for us to assume tomorrow is going to look like today, I think is foolish. So something's going to change. It could be that that the Condine report can get publicized in such a way that people recognize. It's not simply having the truth and confirmation out there. The truth has to be packaged in a way that hits the sweet spot, as it were, of the public. It's got to be presented in a manner that people are paying attention to. That's one thing. And then it's not just the Condine report, but it's the entire UFO phenomenon. We've got to continue finding ways of doing that.
There is enough information out there, I think, if you put them all together, because that's one of Nick's points, is that he said we need open government. But here's my question.
This has been my goal my whole life, John. I mean, to write books. I mean, this is why I wrote UFOs in the National Security State. It's exactly why. What did I want to do? I wanted to put together as logical and coherent and well-researched history as I could. And I will just say, in the late 90s, when I was wrapping up that first volume, I had this little fantasy at times that I would entertain, that maybe, just maybe, this book was good enough that people would say, wow, this really proves the matter. But of course, I put it out there, and yes, there are people who like that work, but has it caused disclosure? No, of course not.
Well, my question is, Richard, here's the thing that concerns me. The government has never been open government. People from the old days believe it was, but it was just, there wasn't that much media, so it was easily controlled.
Exactly.
But they've always gone along, and the politicians have fallen in line with whatever the underlying, like they say, politicians come and go, but there's an underlying government, there's an underlying group of money and people that control how everything goes. Now, what could be one of the reasons is they are conditioning, because I'm going to bring up Kit Green on this. He made a comment one time in Mirage Man. He said, well, here's my take on this. They're going to make it look a lot worse than it really is on TV and in books and everything else. And eventually they're going to come clean and they're going to tell you it's not as bad as it is. But here's the thing. If they've been able to manipulate us through the years, economically and everything else, wars and everything else that go on, why wouldn't they be holding this in reserve too? And they're slowly conditioning people a certain way coming up to the day, and people call it a false flag. But let's just say they know also that there's going to be a point where they can't totally cover it up, but they still want to try to manipulate us in the way we perceive it and how they can continue to control us going forward.
I think we have to assume that's exactly what they're going to try to do. I mean, that is my governing assumption, that any kind of disclosure is going to be a deceptive disclosure. I don't believe in a truthful disclosure. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there will be think of it. The CIA and all the related agencies have been trying to control this phenomenon, the PR on this phenomenon, for an entire human lifetime. There's no way I can imagine that they're simply going to walk away from the table with a disclosure announcement and say, oh, okay, we'll throw up our hands and give you all the information. Not a chance, in my opinion. They've been trying to manage this truth throughout. I think they will continue to try to manage this truth in a post-disclosure world. The one difference is that now, in a post-disclosure world, people like us and other researchers who jump in will have an opportunity, we hope, to counter that dominant narrative, because it will be an open discussion. And I think there is a likelihood that once there is an acknowledgement that people may not necessarily all buy the CIA's line on this, but it will be up to research. The disclosure is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of the true fight to end secrecy.
I agree, but here's my take. I mean, I'm looking at something that really concerns me. I mean, right now, as a society, we're a warring society that any little threat or perceived threat, we want to turn on each other. We want to fight each other. We can't get along individually, in groups, religions and everything else. Okay? The other night, a classic example, how does the X-Files end, which some people say is a prelude to maybe something that's going to come out. They bring in alien hybrids and the threat to mankind, and that most of them people could die, on the only people that are survive are the alien hybrids itself. And alien hybrids are now becoming quite popular, as far as out there, people speculating on that. Yeah. Would that not be a way to just, imagine what if they had to come out and admit like something like that, or there was, like they said back in the late 90s, right before 9/11, that the next threat could be above. What if they introduced that to society? What would that do to us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are, this is an idea that Kit Green has floated out there. And in fact, in one of Grant Cameron's recent book that I republished a couple of years ago, he quoted Kit Green, who said precisely this type of thing, which, in other words, indicating that there is some kind of government Hollywood connection, i.e. people like Chase Brandon, and by which this idea or these ideas about an ET reality they're so deep, they're so profound that it takes time to get the idea out into the public, and that there's a kind of acclimatization process going on. It's kind of, I think, what he hinted, and he talked about the idea of a limited hangout, by which one way to do this acclimatization is you put an idea out there, but you don't take ownership of it. You kind of run away from it, leave it like an orphan, but then it goes out into the society. And I think this is probably happening. I think that there's probably some of that going on.
The very fact that the X-Files came out of the gate after being off television for a long time, they came out of the gate basically pushing in big red pulsing letters, hybrids, they are here. Whether it's the government or something, considers them a threat, and that now there have been 3 shows on the X-Files. And if what they are trying to do, whoever is the they behind X-Files and all of the possible contemplations, whether it's going to be false flags or not, that they could introduce to the world the whole alien presence by pushing the hybrids out there. Doesn't that seem to be the most explosive nitroglycerin step they could take?
Yeah, I guess so. It is true. They've been pushing that, and it is fascinating. And now, when we think about it, I am not aware. I guess Taken, when Spielberg did that over a decade ago. But I don't. Did he do hybrids on that? I'm trying to recall if he did. If he hit the hybrid issue.
It wasn't used that word like it is today when Barbara Lance meet the hybrids and people are coming out of the woodwork saying they are.
So this is it's a new development for television and for mass culture. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how explosive it is. I mean, when the X-Files came out a little over 20 years ago, I thought that was explosive at the time. I thought it had a major cultural impact. So I think, I'm not sure what our point is for this. I think the introduction of hybrids is an interesting development in our cultural narrative here.
Well, let me ask if, in your ability to think about everything you've been exposed to and trying to synthesize what governments might do to actually open up everything and do it in a way that the world doesn't fall apart and people don't attack each other. It seems to me that this is the strangest first step out in television, in X-Files, and in books now of the hybrids. Can you think in your own mind why the government of the United States and others might want to lead with hybrids, and think in terms of the context of Grant raising this in the last few days? How could the Obama administration, through John Podesta and others working behind the scenes, be saying they want this out, they want it out now, but they don't want the government's fingerprints on it? Is there something about hybrids, non-humans being able to manipulate genetic material inside of evolving life forms without any human ever being able to control it, that they would think maybe we can lead with this?
I don't see how Podesta or any of these people could actually believe that they're going to have a confirmation or disclosure without the government fingerprints on it. I don't see what fantasy world they're living in that they could think that this is a possibility. I don't think it's a possibility at all. I do think that there is a disclosure scenario that they would like. I don't know about Podesta. I can't speak for him. But I'm going to say for the secret keepers, and I realize that's generic, but I think that they have a preferred disclosure scenario, and I would say it's a fascist disclosure scenario. In other words, it is my opinion that from their point of view, they will have a disclosure when they are satisfied that they have achieved full dominance over the narrative, full dominance over all of the cultural institutions that are out there without compete. Just like with a false flag, in fact, when if you're a powerful agency that has the ability to do a false flag, one of the things that means is you control the narrative. If you can't control the narrative, you can't do a false flag. And I think it's the same thing with disclosure of this reality. It is necessary to have control over that. And the only way to do that is by continuing the trend that has been going for quite some time, which is really to create a global fascist system. I mean, we can see it going on all around us. And so I think that we're in a race right now, the people against our handlers. So basically, can we achieve a kind of breakthrough before the whole hammer comes down for all time and forever, controlling us in a virtual fascist reality dictatorship? Or will we make our own kind of breakthrough? This is really how I see it. And I don't know who's going to win that one, but I think that the preferred disclosure is it's fascism, and it's on a global scale. And once those powers that be are satisfied that people are playing their little video games all the time, and they have control over what we call mainstream and establishment media sufficiently that there are no competing narratives. And then, in another 20, 30 years, we've got a whole other scenario. We're going to be looking at advanced AI, quantum computing, kind of maybe even a class-based transhumanism, a utopia for people who can afford it. Is that what they're going to be looking for? A kind of brave new world in which the public is completely, totally dumbed down forever. In that situation, then they might just say, oh, yeah, well, we have this breakaway technology, and it does appear that there are others who are, living among us. That's not my preferred disclosure scenario. I think that there are two other possibilities. One is really what Bryce Sable and I wrote about in AD After Disclosure, what I now call disclosure scenario number 2, or premature disclosure. When we wrote this book 5 years ago, the only thing that I was really thinking is that disclosure would happen by accident. I wasn't thinking that disclosure would happen intentionally by the powers that be. I do now think that they want to do that, but again, only under conditions of totalitarianism. A premature disclosure would be some unexpected crisis happens, whether it's a sighting or whether it's some leak or some kind of, even a global economic meltdown could cause it. And the reason a global economic meltdown could cause premature disclosure is simple. In times of political crisis, economic dislocation, that's when things happen. That's when leaks occur. You look back through the history of this phenomenon. Post-Watergate, our great political crisis of the 70s resulted in a greatly strengthened Freedom of Information Act. Didn't cause disclosure, but it did open up a lot of the information. When the Soviet Union fell apart in the 80s and early 90s, there was a tremendous amount of information that came out. And there are other national examples, which I'll forego, but I do believe that political crisis, economic crisis can lead to openness on this. It's like the rats jumping ship syndrome. When everything bad starts happening, leaks can occur, and I think it can happen in that situation. And we are in a very precarious economic, political situation globally right now. A lot can happen.
What about the non-human intelligences themselves? What if one at least wants all of this broken open? What do you think the non-humans could do to bring truth to this situation? I presume that any of the non-human groups that would be here would be able to do it if they wished, and the fact that they haven't done it out in the open leads me to believe that they are quite happy with the situation as it is. My guess on this, they've been watching us, maybe manipulating us, maybe owning us since forever. And it's only in the last century or so that we have had any kind of ability to deal with them. And I'm not saying that we're in any kind of parity now or that we ever really will be, but we're certainly much better able to detect them now than we could have been 150 years ago. We have all kinds of electronic means available now. We're in the air ourselves now. We have the ability now to explore greater and greater amounts of the world that we live in, including the oceans as well as space. So I think they must be realizing that these humans are on the fast track. We're kind of shooting right up there, and we're about to, as I often like to say, leap into their world to some extent. So I think that now they must be looking at us and wondering what their strategy is going to be. That's what I would guess. By the way, there's a final disclosure scenario that I would personally support, and that would be something along the lines of a people-driven disclosure. And I know that sounds idealistic, but why not? In other words, something in which we reclaim this process, researchers like ourselves who are engaged in this, who are putting the information out there, supporting organizations like WikiLeaks, for example, that might be doing things that are technically illegal but are necessary anyway. Good, excellent UFO research, pragmatic citizen action, things like this. I believe this is the best way, because what we don't want is to be helpless in this process. We want to be active agents in reclaiming our own truth, it seems to me. And I don't think that's an impossibility. And Rich, isn't that beginning to increase in terms of the number of whistleblower types that seem to be coming in many fields? And they are talking about things from being in a plane and what they saw all the way to the Corey Goode and other material about our having a base on Mars, having been there since the 70s.
I would just say I agree with you. I think whistleblowers are important. I think it's absolutely essential before we call anyone a whistleblower that we actually can confirm who they are. I'm not considering some of these whistleblowers to be legitimate until I know exactly who they are. Talk is the easiest thing in the world. If I can confirm someone's background, then yes, they are a genuine whistleblower.
Yeah, I go through and make it a requirement that if somebody says they have served in the military, they have to send me a DD-214 just to establish if they are real. And the people that don't, I won't do anything about them.
You mentioned Corey Goode, and I'm not saying yes or no about him, but I don't have personally any knowledge of confirmation of his background in any way, and so I cannot consider him a whistleblower yet.
That's right, and it came up in the Conscious Life Expo. I asked David Wilcock, I said, have you seen any document, any DD-214, any photos, anything from Corey Goode? And David said, at least straightforwardly, no, I haven't. I said, then do you have any context for backing him up? And David said, I have a second whistleblower. That was his term. I said, do you have any paper trail with the second? He said, no.
Yeah, so these are meaningless. Yeah. To be perfectly honest, they mean nothing.
Yeah. But there does appear, whether it's government inspired or not, it's coming to me in droves. I'm sure it is to you too, where more and more people are coming forward saying that this is what I was exposed to in military experience. And that people who do this say, I'm enraged that the government continues to lie.
I just want to say, since we talked about this, we brought up the whole Mars scenario. Yes, first of all, I like you and like John, I'm sure I get people contacting me who I feel are legitimate, and because I may know them very well on a certain level, or they have information I can confirm about various aspects of the UFO ET reality. I get that frequently. I don't get information about people who've been to Mars. I mean, I'm just not getting that anything that I consider credible. And I would say that our community's got to be very careful about accepting any of those claims, because look, I assume that there is a secret space program. I've been talking about this for a long time. But if we were part of a team that was running a secret space program and we were worried about the cover being blown, would it not be a possibility that we would put our own bit of false information out there and feed it to certain personalities in this field who get a lot of publicity so that they could just repeat it? That putting information that's not credible, that throws researchers off on the wrong path, basically down to a dead end. I think it would be entirely within the realm of likelihood. So I'm careful about these so-called whistleblowers until I can confirm who they are.
And what is your perspective on why we are getting commercials on television now about getting to Mars? They're making it sound like it's going to be wonderful to have a human footprint on this planet as a backup to this one. And there is a kind of rah, new frontier feeling. And we know that somewhere in these national security issues of our government, the UK and the allies of World War II, they must be extremely concerned about what climate change could do to this planet for the rest of this century. And that, in fact, Mars may be the only back door.
Doesn't it seem absurd? It shocks me, to answer your question. I'm astonished by this attitude because, and first of all, Bigelow is, I believe, very much involved in all of that effort to go to Mars, or at least the talk about going to Mars.
That's what Cap said, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems extraordinary to me. I mean, think about the logic. You know, we're trashing the Earth. We're not going to make Earth habitable. The most perfect, pristine paradise imaginable in all of the universe, our planet. And we're going to go where? To Mars? Which, forgive me unless I'm missing something here, but it's really not very habitable in any kind of official way that I can imagine. But we're going to go there and make it better. It just seems absurd to me. But what's really shocking to me is, in terms of official technology, everything that's above board, that's open out there, I don't see any technology that would allow us currently to colonize Mars. Now, there's black budget technology that I think exists that could very easily, possibly allow us to go off world, and maybe with terms of energy generation, generation of oxygen and so on, they might be able to do it. But none of that's official. So right? So where are they getting this from?
Well, yesterday there was an article that circulated from NASA saying that they now got to the point where they're looking at technology. They can get humans there in 30 days or less, and ships or resupply ships there in 3 days. But here, I brought that up to Linda myself. I have to wonder if it's not misdirection, because, again, I have the same viewpoint as you. We have an Earth that's still inhabitable, okay? We have an Earth that we can make changes and do certain things that could very well keep us from blowing it up or ruining it. Why would we not try to do that before we go to a planet where there's no guarantee any of this is going to work? And why would we blow the last bit of money or whatever we have taking that risk when we wouldn't at least try to straighten the mess out here first?
Yeah, it seems an ominous implication, Richard, and it reminds me of a man who came to see me, said that he had information that in 1978 that we were able to put a military installation in a lava tube on Mars. He came from White Sands, and yes, I saw his ID. I knew he did. His source about the military installation in the lava tube in 1988 was the Naval Research Lab, a person he knew there. And he said that a physicist talking to him, who's talking to me, he was a meteorologist, he said, about Mars, we're going there because humans are like grasshoppers before the winter on Earth. Now, what have they been anticipating since the 1970s? What kind of information has been exchanged in Project Sigma between our government and non-humans? And the other piece of this was he implied that we got to Mars and we were able to put a military installation in that lava tube because we had an allyship with one of the alien presences. What would be the aliens' motive for getting humans to Mars?
I could believe this. Did you say 78 or 88, by the way? Because I thought you said twice, both of them. 1988 or 1978?
Sorry, I'll make it very clear. He came to see me in Denver in 1988 from White Sands.
Oh, okay.
To tell me about his source at the Naval Research Lab, a physicist who was describing a 1978 or installation inside of the lava tube on Mars, which, interestingly enough, it was the 1970s that Alternative 3 made such an imprint, both in that documentary that was sort of done like a docudrama and the book by Watts.
Well, as you recounted it and the way that you recounted it in your context, I could believe that this is a true scenario, that this is the case. And in which case, are they doing an Alternative 3 type of scenario in which they expect something truly awful is going to happen to the Earth? If that's the case, I wouldn't want. Who would want to live on Mars? It would be the most awful thing to lose the Earth.
And would something being expected in this kind of scenario finally explain why our government and the allies of World War II remain so silent in the face of all kinds of breaking stories, abductions, mutilations, crop formations, that their only retaliation is to slam doors down with ridicule, satire, when in fact all of us who are really investigating know these all are real phenomena. So is the government saying in a policy of complete denial that they're not going to open up anything because they know that something huge is coming?
Well, if it's this bad a scenario, if they know that something's going to, let's say, wipe out humanity on Earth or wipe out much of Earth, that's a such a heavy piece of information. I mean, clearly, I don't think there's any way that they could possibly voluntarily disclose that. I don't know if I would want to be honest, if I were in the know and I knew that Earth was going to end at a certain period of time and there was really nothing we could do about it. What would they do? They would create a secret space program. They would covertly colonize Mars and or the moon if they had the ability with radical technology, and maybe save who and what they could and leave it at that.
Well, let's bring up something then. Bigelow,
if that's the case.
Right. Well, let's look at the facts. I mean, as best as we can. Bigelow definitely took a huge interest in this for different reasons. He then turned around, got all the MUFON documents, put together a team with astronauts and everybody else, started looking at all this, bought out NASA for their, those hotels or whatever you want to call them, which I never really believed they were hotels.
Oh,
and
right.
It's starting to become true. They're not. They are actually, they claim now they're going to take those and use those to transport people between here and Mars. And the fact that George Knapp, when we had him on, I think in August of last year, said he is the lead in all of this to the moon and to Mars. What does that say? What does that say? These are things that are out there that aren't conspiracies that are really going on.
No, right. What I would speculate, and this would be my leading speculation at the time, is that what Bigelow's doing is actually serving partly as a cover for the genuine breakaway technology that is being used at a much deeper black level for the same purpose.
And Richard completely reinforcing that in that interview between George Knapp and Robert Bigelow. Bigelow established that he is the only person who has a contract with NASA to put his modules on Mars.
Yeah, that's right. I knew Bigelow had a unique contract with Mars, and that was it. Yeah. So it just seems like this would be a good cover. I don't know exactly about you guys, but I assume you're probably also thinking that there's radically advanced technology that's being withheld. I certainly believe that. And if that's so, then there's a radically advanced program that already exists. So whatever Bigelow is officially proposing makes me think that, that's not really the most advanced technology anyway. I had a conversation with a retired Boeing engineer a little over a year ago who spoke to me in great detail about Boeing manufacturing the black triangles and using geomagnetic principles and going off-world with them. And he didn't have all the information about the technical aspects. He didn't understand it all himself. But I will say that I had a detailed conversation with him, and I knew his wife. These are very, very good people. I believe this man. I know he was at Boeing for a long period of time. So if that's so, if they've got black triangle technology that is highly advanced, I don't see why they would actually need whatever technology Bigelow is introducing to do the same thing, except for him to provide cover.
Right, and this is a good point. We're due a break now, so when we come back, let's go deeper into Bigelow.
That wraps up the first hour of tonight's interview with special guest UFO historian and author Richard Dolan. To find the latest on Richard Dolan, log on to his website at richarddolanpress.com. Stay right there. Hour 2 of tonight's program starts right after these messages from your choice for UFO Paranormal Talk Radio on the World Wide Web. We're KGRARadio.com. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live.
At MSC Cruises, we believe life should be measured in moments, not minutes. The moment you set eyes on the perfect blue of the Caribbean, the moment you breathe in the sweet, salty air of freedom, the moment you let out the sound of true happiness. Find your moments aboard one of the newest members of our fleet. Introducing MSC Divina, now sailing the Caribbean year-round from Miami. Contact your travel advisor or visit msccruises.com today.
Call Holiday Maker Travel toll-free at 877-642-4308. Check out their website at holidaymakertravel.com or email them at info@holidaymakertravel.com to reserve your MSC cruise today.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Van Buren, Arkansas. Sarasota, Florida.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy Award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone, and something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, along with documentaries, are available in the shop at earthfiles.com.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk.
No way you could keep a secret as big as covering up a UFO. Is this how evidence is suppressed?
Always has been. Always will be. KGRA, the planet.
You're listening to the KGRA digital broadcast station, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida. We begin hour 2 of tonight's interview with UFO historian and author Richard Dolan on Phenomenon Radio with Linda Moulton Howe and John Burroughs. But first, it's time for the news. Brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Once upon a time, the word beam meant a ray of light. Today, beams are headed for the moon and maybe Mars to live in. These space beams stand for Bigelow Expandable Activity Module. The creator is billionaire Robert Bigelow, who announced in 2013 that he would build lightweight, blow-up space homes and place one on the International Space Station by 2016. Recently, he invited reporters to his Las Vegas, Nevada warehouse to see one of his refrigerator-sized beams that can blow up to 10.5 feet wide with enough cubic space to be a studio apartment in New York. He told the reporters, quote, "You laughed at me when we said we would build an expandable system and place it on the International Space Station in 2.5 years. Well, it's been 2 years and a quarter, and here we are," close quote. Adding to the seriousness now of Robert Bigelow's mission is the fact that NASA has contributed a $17.8 million contract for the beam development, and perhaps by the end of 2016, a beam will be launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket headed for the International Space Station. There, a beam will be blown up and attached to the ISS for a 2-year test by astronauts to see how the module's soft walls hold up orbiting Earth at about 5 miles a second. Will the beam leak air? Will the sun's powerful radiation erode the gray Kevlar-like material? If the beam blow-up rooms work, it will cost only about $150 million to produce and launch, compared to an estimated $100 billion to produce and build the ISS. Robert Bigelow sees beams going beyond the ISS to the moon and probably Mars. He says the beam on the ISS is, quote, a first step toward a permanent settlement on the lunar surface. Both would do something unique in a unique place that has international interests and would require a lot of partners, governmental and non-governmental. The beam launch is not just a stunt, and neither are our moon plans, close quote. Robert Bigelow already has a larger goal beyond the beam. It's called the B330, and it will be able to house a crew of 6 with zero-gravity toilets, windows, solar and thermal arrays, and an 18-inch thick skin to protect from micrometeorites. The goal is to launch that larger expandable spacecraft in 2018, perhaps to begin Robert Bigelow's dream, to see his blow-up housing in low Earth orbit between the Earth and the Moon, and then permanently on the lunar surface and beyond to Mars and our solar system. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earthfiles news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com. For more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news, brought to you by Earthfiles.com. And to continue tonight's interview with UFO historian and author Richard Dolan, here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. Richard, when we went to break, we were talking about Robert Bigelow. Do you think he knows something, all the research he did through MUFON with NIDS and everything else that he was working on? Do you think they discovered something or there's something there? Because it's clear they've got the government's attention. NASA's working with them, and he controls us going out into space. And why would we be such a push to do that when we should be trying to take care of our own house first?
Yeah, great question, John. And I guess I don't know. I don't have the opportunity to have had a one-on-one conversation with Robert Bigelow, but I do know something about his history in this field. He's been deeply involved in this for a number of decades and highly knowledgeable. I think people who've chatted with him all agree he's extremely very knowledgeable about what's going on, and he's very well connected. His connection with MUFON a number of years ago, seems to me the whole point was for him to get up-to-date data on certain key types of UFO events that MUFON might have had access to. So Bigelow, I think, does know something. And does he know something that we don't know in terms of what's going on Mars or in any other context? And it wouldn't surprise me that the answer would be yes. I just don't know for sure.
If the United States has a secret space program, Rich, and if a lot of money and time and effort, such as Robert Bigelow, putting some kind of modules out in space and getting us to Mars and having the only contract with NASA to construct some kind of, let's say, habitation on Mars, why wouldn't that same energy, money, everything that's going into the dark space program be applied directly to Earth and trying to help us here?
Well, exactly. That's the great question. We have a civilization here on Earth that's in trouble, and we have so much great potential to create something truly beautiful for the entire species and for all life forms here. We have that ability. And if there is knowledge that is being locked up at the moment and only being used for a very few people for their own purposes, I can't think of anything that would be more criminal, more evil, if I can use that word. We've got a serious situation and yet great potential here for a beautiful life on Earth. We can still do it, it seems to me. And it's like the human race has got its hands tied on this matter.
And what if the powers that be, that they know that what is coming in the future is so big that something wants at least some humans to get off Earth?
Well, I hate speculating on such dire scenarios like that without real evidence, behind it. But it is, I would say that it is a scenario that could be possible. We were just talking about this a little while ago, something so bad that might be known to a very few people. There have been this theme throughout the history of UFOs. Every now and then you get this indication that there's some really dark element to this whole reality. I wrote about a couple of them in After Disclosure. I talked about the Jimmy Carter story and I know this is, it's unconfirmed, but I know the source and I trust this source, who said after Carter was briefed on this in 1977, was seen at his desk basically sobbing. There was another gentleman interviewed, that appeared in our book, who had been an undersecretary in the first administration of Ronald Reagan's presidency, and spoke to a very close friend of the family, a young man at the time, and said, I was taken for 2 weeks or a month to an underground facility shortly after I took office, and that that briefing included UFO/ET information, and the only thing he said is, I'm very upset because I have a daughter to raise in this world. But he gave a very strong indication that there's something dark here. So every now and then there's this thread of darkness, and I don't like going there personally, especially without confirmation. But I think to be responsible, we have to consider that there could be a dark side to this, indeed. And if those people have the secret, know it, it's very easy to see why they wouldn't want to give it up.
Well, let's look at some facts right now that aren't conspiracy based. Okay, number one, when 9/11 happened, we were $2 trillion that the Pentagon couldn't account for.
Yeah.
Now they're up to $9 trillion. Okay, and what I mean is the money's been allocated, but it's not audited, and they won't explain where it's going. They're the only agency in the government, by law, they're supposed to be audited, that doesn't follow the law. So within our own government, the people that we've put in charge, they choose to ignore where this money is going. You know? So number one, we can't account for our money. Which leads, is it just all fraud, waste, and abuse? Probably not. It's going into some black project.
Absolutely.
Okay. The second factor that people have not really looked at closely, and I'm doing some work on it right now, is that right now there's two places that the United States government and the British and the French are looking at. They're taking over Central Africa. The center part of Africa, we're completely militarizing it, both with the French, the Americans, and the British. And then also the center part all the way down into the south tip of South America, to include all the major people with money in the United States side. And the Bush family has bought a huge amount of land and have developed a huge ranch down there in Paraguay. And we also now have a large military footprint down there that's not being publicly talked about, but you can go right on there and see black and white that Rumsfeld and Bush actually authorized, and we now have a huge operations going down in Paraguay.
Right.
What does that all mean?
Well, in terms of the missing money, this is a really important issue. And, you know, I often in conversation with Catherine Austin Fitz, who's really not just a good researcher, a great researcher, but one of my close friends. She's a financial whiz, as I like to say, and she is really maybe the best student publicly on the black budget economics that I know of. And what she's talked about is, you know, economists like to go on the assumption that we have a closed system, that is everything, like a body is a closed system and an economy is a closed system, that there's nothing outside acting on it. But she said, in fact, it acts like it's in part of an open system. And the open part of it would be this breakaway black budget type of a civilization. That's the money siphoning. Some of that money is going into that. And I think that that's the most reasonable hypothesis, that we have an open, not a closed global financial system.
And breakaway civilization would be on Mars.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, sure, it could be. I still feel Earth is where the action is, and I suspect that that's where probably the best advanced infrastructure is, but it could be on Mars. If we have the ability to go off-world, if we've got some kind of geomagnetic system of propulsion, a different form of energy that's better than petroleum, ways of generating oxygen out of the natural environment that's practical, going deep into underground facilities that are safe. I mean, you could do it. We have the ability in our own world. I'm thinking of the research of Dr. Richard Sauder. He's talked a lot about underground and undersea capabilities that have existed for decades. We can do that here. I assume we could do it elsewhere. The other part of what John was asking about, buying up resources and controlling resources in Africa and South America. I'm not sure how I would say that ties in. I mean, that's obvious criminal activity by elite plutocrats who want to own everything that's worth owning in the world. The Bush people are gobbling up all the water in Paraguay, from what I understand, and probably much more. Yeah,
they own the largest standing, clean water there's left. Yeah. That is the largest in the world, they said down there. But,
oh my God!
But see, the thing is, that's the point. And I've had some interaction with some physicists that their biggest concern is clean water, but there is some kind of calamity coming. And I'm not trying to tie this directly to UFOs necessarily, but there is some kind of, maybe even you can call it extinct level calamity coming, and we're preparing for all this. And the question is there just misdeception going, keeping people completely off the ball? Because one of the things that you have to look at, you said, could there be a false flag? Well, there is a false flag being put together right now. Fear. Look what happened last year in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore. They practically burned that whole area down in Ferguson. I mean, this is race. We're still fighting each other. Imagine if they exposed that there was some kind of aliens among us. What would that create? What problems would we have? And what do they know? And I have to bring up the remote viewing program right now. What have they seen in this remote viewing program that's driving some of this? Because Bigelow was clearly looking at that and working on that.
Well, yes, and Bigelow is very, very close to some of the leading figures in the history of American remote viewing. Hal Puthoff, one example right off the bat, and John Alexander, another one, and I'm sure there's many, many others. I've been fascinated by remote viewing for a very long time, and I have been convinced for equally a long time that that's a legitimate phenomenon, and it's not always 100% correct, obviously, but there's something to it. In fact, the reality of remote viewing, I felt for a long time, forces us to rethink what is the very fabric of our reality of space-time itself. I mean, if you can see across space or across time, what does that say about time and causality, among other things? But that said, I think remote viewing is something that's being taken very seriously, and it wouldn't shock me that they've remote viewed, whether it's Mars. I had a conversation years ago with Russell Targ, who along with Hal Puthoff created the protocols for remote viewing out of Stanford Research Institute. And Russell told me point blank, and I've repeated this a number of times, but it's worth saying again, that in the early 1980s, he was charged with training remote viewers out of Fort Meade, Maryland, whose job was to remote view the far side of the moon. And he said this to me, and I just let that hang there for a minute. And I said, well, why would they do that, Russell? And he threw it right back at me and said, why do you think? And I said, okay, I'll bite. Were they going to be remote viewing for ET on the far side of the moon? I figured I would ask. And he didn't say no. He didn't say maybe. He said yes. That was going to be their job. Now, and then I asked, did they find ET? And he said, well, I don't know. That wasn't part of my job. Whether he knows or not, I don't know. But if they're going to be looking for ET on the far side of the moon in the early 1980s, I got to think they had a good reason for looking for ET on the far side of the moon. I mean, why would you, right? So I think that they've been doing this for a long time, and I'm sure they know things.
And in the fall of 2015, I asked Lynn Buchanan if he had done any remote viewing going from 2016, 10 years to 2026.
Okay.
And he said that he was concerned about it, but he did like a 3 or 4 paragraphs for me that a couple of weeks later I learned.
Really?
And here is sort of the summary, that he sees that over the next 20 to 25 years, there will be a huge population decline on Earth. And this is the thing that troubled him and is confusing to me. He said that he thought that the decline in population was going to be directly linked to the current generation of children.
What?
And that made me ask, could we be talking about a revolution that is coming because there has been alien, non-human, genetic manipulation in the current evolving Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien to replace us slowly, but eventually with hybrids? And would the hybrid focus in the real X-Files, out in the literature now, coming forth, is it that we, Cro-Magnon, are being replaced by hybrids and the government knows there's nothing they can do about it on Earth? But if they can get a Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien settlement in Mars and beyond, then they might be able to preserve that which they consider to be truly human.
Sure. I mean, it's why wouldn't that? I guess that could happen for sure. I am aware a number of remote viewers have also, looking into the future, seen depopulation as part of our future. And the real thing that I would wonder is, I've done some casual reading on declining human male sperm counts, for example. I've read about this, and I know women are also having various types of growing infertility problems. Most of this, I understood, have been linked to greater toxicity in our natural environment. Wouldn't surprise me in the least, and it could be that which would cause maybe we get to a tipping point where there's a massive inability to reproduce. Right. That's a possibility.
That comes up to something that's very interesting. When we had, I'm having one of those senior moments. We had Tom Dolan on. He talked about DNA and how it's advanced. And they now have gotten into our junk DNA. They're actually looking at it, and they're discovering messages within our DNA. And there seems to be a huge push. And again, this isn't conspiracy.
Messages.
There's messages.
What do you mean by that?
Binary code, that there are papers that have been written by at least 2 scientists that are saying that for the first time they are, I guess I'm going to use the word, uncovering that in the junk DNA portion of our DNA, that someone now is saying there are zeros and ones embedded in the junk DNA, and that they are withdrawing. They are able to take out binary code and translate it.
That's kind of heavy duty. I've not heard that. That's amazing. My understanding of junk DNA was always, I've never been one to be impressed by the whole junk DNA focus, only because evolutionarily speaking, I had always assumed that junk DNA is simply, obsolete DNA. I mean, if a species goes through a process of evolution, it's not like computers where you can delete the old files. You just make them inoperative and you develop new files, as it were, and that the old files that are inoperative become junk. So like if you were to activate all of your junk DNA, you'd turn into some kind of monster, right? So I never really thought much about this, but if there's a true binary sequence on that, well, that would certainly be interesting.
Well, this is an implication that comes from the human abductees as well, that DNA is not simply here in us on this planet to divide cells. That DNA itself is some sort of a molecular crystal structure, and we know that when DNA separates and chromosomes are involved in the cell separation, the German scientists have been able to photograph photon light energy coming from dividing DNA.
Wow. That's fascinating.
That's a fact. And so what exactly is DNA? And if we knew the truth, would DNA be sort of like, we'll call it the prime life seed throughout this particular universe, and that the non-humans that are interacting with Earth and throughout this cosmos, that they have been working with it for a very long time, and it might explain when the abductees say the praying mantis type is an android whose very mission is to oversee the seeding of planets with DNA as a seed, and then monitoring and evolving life on various planets, but DNA as a structure is the basic life seed.
Well, I suppose maybe. I mean, it's quite fascinating. But, I just had an insight in where we're talking about here, which is we started out by discussing confirmation versus disclosure. And, we've been chatting for a little over an hour, and it seems to me how far we have gone into this discussion. This is why I believe, no simple confirmation would ever just be sufficient. Think about it. This phenomenon, what we loosely call UFOs, is so rich and so filled with intellectual possibilities and profound implications for our society and for ourselves as a civilization and as a species. All the implications will come out, and it's only a matter of time. And just to bring it back to our initial point, I just don't think it is possible in the least for there to be a quote unquote confirmation, and then for someone just to walk away and say, oh, okay, we'll just put it out there. It's never going to be that simple. The implications for what we are talking about in this phenomenon have to do with our very essence of who and what we are, and to say nothing of these other beings that we're interacting with, you know.
Well, here's something that I wanted to bring up, because I talked to George Knapp off air on this. And is Bigelow saying that that's what's going to happen, or is he trying to imply that's what's already happened? I mean, and what I'd really like to get into a little bit too before we end the show is what documents out there now confirm confirmation. You know, confirm confirmation. And what I mean by that is the presidents come and go, and even the heads of the military do, but they're there a lot longer. Usually the top generals are there 30 plus years. And there's been a lot of things that have been said by different people at different times in history talking about what's going on, you know, what they're seeing, how they're dealing with it, how it can't be controlled. Even when you get into Condign, because they like to tear it apart, but it says right in Condign that it's real. It's there, it's indisputable, and it can do things that we cannot understand and deal with. And the problem is then you get in deeper into Condign, and Condign then is all redacted. And a lot of it's redacted defense, which means it's clear the next phase is the military is looking at it on how to militarize it to be able to control individual countries. And unfortunately, people don't want to accept this, but the military also is there because we can have martial law to control populations within their own countries.
Yeah. Well, you're asking what confirmations are there.
Right.
In addition to the Condign report, which I agree is a very important piece of confirmation, but I would also add that the long history of, in the brief era when the Freedom of Information Act was truly a useful tool for researchers, and I'm talking about the late 1970s, primarily the Jimmy Carter era, there were several thousands of pages of FOIA through FOIA of government military documents that were released. And most of them are not all that fascinating, but some are. A large handful are absolutely fascinating. And, I could cite chapter and verse on those, but I don't want to bore people to death. But there's
Which
famous...
I think is the single most important document that you could put out to CNN right now and say, this is confirmation of an alien presence.
How about this one? My personal favorite one. There's a number that I think are excellent, but from December 1952. The scientific director of the CIA, H. Marshall Chadwell, writing to his boss, the director of the CIA, Walter Beadle Smith, about, in the context of all of the UFO sightings that had taken place in the United States in 1952, that's a whole story unto itself. Chadwell writes a particular paragraph where he says, at this time, the reports of incidents convince us that there is something going on which must have immediate attention. Sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. I don't know how much more explicitly you want someone to say it other than, boss, I think we're being invaded. He's saying they're not natural. And he's talking about Los Alamos, the green fireball phenomenon, and much, much more. But over Los Alamos, you had the so-called green fireballs, which were being noted and recorded and observed by the power scientists who were high up in the military at that time. And this is a very specific phenomenon. No one ever figured this one out, by the way. But here's Chadwell saying it's not natural phenomena and it's not anything that we know. That is, it's not Soviet, it's not American. So what are these things? There was another, along with that, a confirmation had to do with what Dr. Bruce Maccabee talked about many, many times relating to something called Project Twinkle. And this is also, like the Condign report, equally important. In Twinkle, what they did is in the late 40s, early 50s, the Air Force set up a triangulation system using cinetheodolites and primarily to track this phenomenon, and they triangulated it. I believe, and Bruce believes, it was intentionally set up to fail, but even so, they captured one confirmed object traveling at above 100,000 feet altitude traveling in the multiple thousands of miles per hour with a diameter of 30 feet. And this is a confirmed triangulated object caught by Project Twinkle. Now, again, in 1950, I think when they got this one, there's nothing that was supposed to be doing this. So there is absolute confirmation that was being taken seriously by the United States national security community. And the fact is, this is 60 plus years ago, and they were not talking then publicly, and they're not talking now. We got lucky in that we got some of these documents released during a brief golden moment in our history after Watergate. In the political mood of the U.S. in the late 70s was unusual in that it was probably more liberal in our public discourse than it has been at any other time in the 20th century. And Jimmy Carter, when he was president, told federal agencies that they were to provide a liberal interpretation of FOIA, that is not to charge people an arm and a leg and not to take forever to release these documents unless it was a severe repercussion on national security. And as a result, a lot came out, and including the Chadwell memo and much, much more. So, I'm sorry.
Do you think it means that there have been these very advanced triangles referenced even in the Psalm 101 going back to a 1954 War Department stamp when RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, what was in the forest, according to Peniston, was a black, glassy triangle. That when you go to Roswell, the release that went out of Roswell Army Airfield was that the disc, a flying saucer, had crashed near Corona, when in fact all of the documents that have been seemingly leaked about Majestic 12 and the White Hot document describe them as plan forms, which back in the 1950s, that was a word used to describe something that was delta-shaped or triangular shape.
It could have been a delta shape or triangular shape. And, keeping in mind the Roswell statement that came out, this is Colonel and later General Blanchard who authorized it. But let's keep in mind, he was not at the site himself, and flying discs was in the news and dominating the news at that time. I think it's very...
Because everything public was disc. And yet, what was in the official documents that we didn't see until the 90s, and in RAF Bentwaters and many other places, they have been triangular craft.
Well, I think we've been seeing both, to be honest with you, Linda. I mean, there's been no shortage of disc-shaped objects that absolutely have been noted, and there's also been crescent-shaped and triangular-shaped, and this does go back. My assumption is that these are either there's maybe a misidentification at times, but it's also very possible that there are just different designs out there.
Well, we're going to come up on a break, but I want to bring up something on that, what Dr. Dolan said. Remember, Linda, he said the triangulars belonged somewhere else, and the disc were something that we were trying to create ourselves?
Yes.
He brought that up there during the interview, and he said that the triangular stuff was, technology from somewhere else. Right. So on that note, we've got to go on a break, and when we come back, there's a couple questions I want to ask you, Richard, about how they're covering up today.
Okay.
To find the latest on the Phenomenon Radio Show, log on to the website at phenomenonradio.com. For the latest in science, the environment, and real X-Files, visit the award-winning website earthfiles.com. We will be right back for the final segment of tonight's program on the best choice for alternative talk radio on the planet, KGRAradio.com. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio.
Your UFO paranormal powerhouse of live alternative talk radio. KGRA, The Planet.
Welcome back to the final segment of Phenomenon Radio with tonight's very special guest, UFO historian and author Richard Dolan. Here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. Richard, there's a couple things I want to bring up to start this last half an hour. Number one, I did some FOIA. It's over 3 years ago now, where the MOD got caught red-handed lying. And there's no other way to explain it than they were lying. They came out and said they had released everything they had. Now they've openly admitted, and on the floor of the House of Lords, they're still holding 18 files that they held back, okay? 6 of them are policy files. Now, one of the things that people may not understand about what they do over in Britain is the MOD has to go through and redact them all. Then they release them to the National Archives, who then takes their time to go through them before they post them. The latest is they may not now get released until almost the end of this year, if not early next year. Here's the thing that's going on. They're in a bind right now, and I think people need to pay some more attention. And I want to hear your take on this. Is people think when they make these quick headlines, they say MOD's released everything they had. Yet when these documents are released, a lot of it's still heavily redacted. They're holding back stuff. And then some of the debunkers say, well, it's just our stuff they're holding back. Well, what would our stuff, and there's some explanation why some of our stuff could be involved in all this, but this is supposed to be more about the UFO, UFAP stuff. So I don't really think our technology would be too much in there, or is it our technology that we glean from the phenomenon itself? And the second thing is, I think people need to understand another way they're getting around this, and I've got a FOIA I'm holding on to that blew my mind. They openly admitted this to me, but I'm waiting to see what they do with these 18 files. They openly admitted to me they've developed technology off of the phenomena that's mentioned in Project Condign that they cannot talk much about because it's been farmed out to defense companies over there and it's under patent. So they're hiding this stuff, and they do these little clip blurps on CNN and everything else saying it's all out, and no one ever covers the fact that a lot of it's still redacted.
Fantastic point, John. And, the fact is that every couple of years we get these announcements in the media that, Britain, the MOD has released all of their information on UFOs. This happens again and again. And it's so transparent to me that the UK media, BBC, just works hand in glove with the government. All that they are is a propaganda arm for the government at this point. They're nothing other than that. So they lie with the same kind of there is just complicit in the lies as much as the government. So, right, there's no actual disclosure. And the other thing that when the MOD releases all their documents, like when you look, there's so much redundancy and so much you actually get right down to it. And when you read this released documents, and I've done it, there's often just very little there. It's a lot of fluff. The idea that the redacted parts are hiding our own technology, I'm inclined to side with what you said after that, which is that I think we're working on our own breakthroughs based on what we have acquired. And it's very likely that some of the technological breakthroughs are being hidden and they're classified. And very likely, in my view, that those redactions would probably lead one to conclude that this is acquired technology. Every leak that means anything to me that I've gotten from someone indicates that that's exactly what's happened. We've gotten access to exotic tech that did not originate from this civilization, and that is the core of what's going on. That is reverse engineering non-human technology. I think that's what's going on. The patent part that you're discussing, the privatization of the secrecy, I think this is key as well. In other words, I think that we have to stop looking at UFO secrecy as something classified and really start looking at it as something that's proprietary. What are governments now other than simply tools used by massively powerful transnational corporate interests that use governments for their own purposes anyway? And they want these secrets. They privatize the secrets. They're protected by patents, and it's impervious from freedom of information requests, typically, anyway.
Well, the other interesting thing is I backtraced a lot of the people back in back when it was more, the FOIA actually exposed some of this, and most of those people have now left the agencies, the intelligence agencies, and they're now contractors, and they fall outside now of the FOIA itself. Once some of that stuff got leaked in the 70s, and then Bill Clinton tried to push some of it back out in the 90s, which Greg Cameron talked about. They got all these people that were working on this outside the realm of FOIA because it goes into these defense companies, and all this stuff is given to these defense companies. So when a FOIA question is asked about the government's knowledge, they either say there is nothing there on the books, or, like, I was very amazed that the MOD admitted to me that they actually have a weapon now they've developed off of what they talked about in Project Conduct.
Yeah, that's incredible. And, you and I a couple of years ago had this discussion, and it really made a very significant impact on my own thinking, which is the idea of weaponizing this technology, that this is a very significant. And, of course, it makes perfect sense. If you're a military organization, you have access to this exotic tech, of course you're going to want to weaponize it, right? Obviously.
Right. Well, you've got to look at terahertz radiation that now is out, and it plays into quite a bit of possibly the advanced technology and even the propulsion systems that we've developed, either have developed or in the process of finalizing right now, including what Tom Dolan talked about. He said that, gravitics, which is a big deal, and there's been a lot of interest in that. Gravitics is like impulse power, he basically said, in Star Trek. And I know for a fact, and there's been articles that are mainstream now, that we're very close to warp drive. So what's that tell you? Where did all this technology come from?
I'm starting to think, I'm going to update my own thoughts on what I call fascist disclosure. I still think that's what they're trying to do, but maybe the real goal of those people trying to disclose anything would be to use cover organizations like Bigelow and others as a means of kind of getting eventually some of this radical technology out in a controlled way, so that clearly so that they can continue monetizing it. I would think that's key. And maybe there's no desire for them to disclose anything about non-human extraterrestrials. If they don't feel that they're being pressured to do so, what they can simply do is say, look, we finally have developed anti-grav. We have finally developed these magnetic principles of propulsion and so on and so on. We have developed warp drive. We didn't do it with aliens, people. We just did it on our own. And they would use people in organizations like Bigelow's to segue those radical technologies out, all by way of cover for black budget.
Yeah, like a crosswave when music. They're going from one part of the music to another without anybody knowing, because they're doing a crossfade, and Bigelow would be the cover of the next part that's coming in.
Yeah, I wonder if that's really what they would be trying to do. That would make me wonder, where would the classified world be in this? I assume anything that they're revealing to us, the classified world's beyond us. That's my assumption. But it is true, like if they let out certain radical developments, I'm going to guess they'll only do it in a way that they can monetize. By the way, this is why I think we're seeing movements for things like TPP being shoved down our throats surreptitiously, and why no one's allowed to talk about it publicly. And the reason I think some of these transnational agreements are so important in the context of our discussion is very simple. Let's say some smart person in another country comes up with a revolutionary energy harvesting device, let's say, or some other kind of technology that would be classified in the American black budget world. Tools like TPP would then be used to prevent not only Americans but non-Americans from infringing on classified U.S. patents. So it would be a way of kind of nailing down a global legal structure, intellectual property rights structure, that would prevent people from having basically kind of like a next generation Pirate Bay, by which you can, using advanced 3D printing techniques, for example, download and create your own energy harvesting device and allow you to live off the grid. That's absolutely what I'm sure the powers that be do not want us to have. They do not want us to have independence. They want us to be part of this hierarchical control system that they're benefiting from. And so I think the whole goal that they've got is to make sure that they've got all of that system controlled and in place, and then maybe portion out little trinkets here and there, trinkets of truth and trinkets of technology that they deem fit.
Rich, what if throughout this solar system, quite literally, from here past Ceres, Enceladus, Pluto, and beyond, that there already are territories that have been blocked out and used by conflicting geopolitical, territorial, conflicting non-human intelligences, and that the crossfade is not just covering humans getting to Mars because something might happen here. It is that the enormous truth is that there are so many different non-human intelligences, some cooperating and a lot not, and that there are geopolitical territorial conflicts in our own solar system, and our government is not only trying to keep that from us while they keep the fact that there's an alien presence on this earth. The crossfades are more than one.
Yeah.
They're trying to get us into a point where they can just have any explanation for something like a mining operation on Ceres, which is possible. They're trying to get to a point where they could easily say it was Bigelow or somebody else. And until then, they do have a continual problem if they are trying to get through the 21st century without anybody knowing an alien presence has been here on Earth for millions of years.
It is an amazing scenario, and the question is, how far can they go with the lies? And it's a fair question to ask. Could it be possible that the lies will extend that significantly into the middle of this century and the later part of this century that we're in? I don't like to think that it's possible, but I have to acknowledge it is possible. Is it likely? I don't know the answer to that one. I mean, are we going to be able to blow the lid off of this? Or will they continue to keep us entrained in a kind of infantile, virtual, fiction, which is really what increasingly we're all living in, kind of a fictitious reality? I mean, think about the layers of propaganda that exist. I mean, not only simply the distractions like the Kardashians and all of that nonsense, which that's sufficient for a lot of people already to keep them off the game. But then the fake news that you get on CNN, which is just complete spin and lies, that itself accounts for probably 95% of the control mechanism in place. And then on top of that, you throw in your false flags and provocations and out and out, dirty tricks. It is entirely possible to keep a public docile and psyched out and fooled for a long, long period of time. But can it be forever? That's the real question.
Well, the problem with that is this. They control us by fear. That's just what it is. They throw all these scenarios out that tomorrow, nukes could go off. The EM pulses could take the grid down and we could all die.
Yeah.
All they want to do is control us by fear. And yet what kills me is the people behind this, they know this better than anybody, that if what they're trying to put out there to control us really happened, what makes for a fact they're going to survive any better than we are? You cannot do what they're trying to control us by and have sustainability on planet Earth. It just can't happen.
And that may be exactly the point, John, that the remote viewers have remote viewed the future, and that something, whether it's human-induced or from the outside, that we end up going through a heavy-duty depopulation of planet Earth.
Well, and here's one last bit of speculation that I hesitate to put out there, but since we're going there, I think it's fair to ask, who is really ultimately guiding this policy, this ruinous policy that is truly destroying the environment around us? Is it human-induced or is it beyond human? Do we not only have an open economic financial system, but do we have an open civilization in the sense that we're being interacted from beyond by other forces? Is it true? And I don't really know the answer to this. I'm just offering it as a possibility that outside forces are intentionally doing this to humanity.
Do you have an expectation based on all your research of red flags of something that you would expect, not that it will happen, but that you would expect is possible in the next 5 to 10 years, a red flag?
Yes, red flag or false flag. I think that we live in an era of false flags, and there's a couple that I think we're actually on the verge of right now, particularly dealing with the Middle East, which I think we've got to be careful of. But in terms of the topics that we're discussing, like the false flags that you're talking about are on the order of 9/11 and beyond. I mean, these are massive false flags if we're talking about something to do with ET or anomalous phenomena reality, as it were. I'm not a believer in the so-called Project Blue Beam scenario. I never have been. I've never been on board with it. That is the false alien invasion that will create a global fascist system. And the only reason I don't find that one credible, at least not yet, is because not only do we have a global scientific community that's skeptical of UFOs, but they're actually just deeply hostile to the whole idea. And it just seems to me you'd have a long, long hurdle, a tall hurdle to overcome to get them simply to buy into that one.
Using one problem to cover up another problem, but the false flag of an alien invasion would open up the billion questions they don't want to deal with.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I've never seen a logic in that scenario. And I know a lot of people believe in that one, but I've never believed in that one. It just seems logistically too much of a nightmare as well.
Let me ask you one question, Richard. If let's just say the X-Files, there's a reason behind it, and some of this other stuff. If they just were forced to admit, let's just say they're doing this genetic testing, this DNA, and somehow it slips out that there is something in the DNA that shows at one point we something from somewhere else influenced how we've evolved. Yeah. And then they have to admit that, and then there might be alien hybrids amongst us. Based on the fear factor alone that they've got us so worked up on. I mean, I'm a military guy. I did 27 years. It sickens me that this country believes that we spend close to $700 billion a year in military spending. We dwarf the rest of the world, which is about equal to what we spend. So we're spending close to $2 trillion a year to kill each other, and that's not enough.
Yeah, exactly,
and
John.
The fear factor is that we need more. We need more weapons to kill each other. And so all it would take would be just the slip up that there was some alien DNA out there. We may have some hybrids out there. What would that do to us?
Well, it depends on how it's spun. And I think that you're really onto it, that it would be spun. It could be spun with a massive fear factor involved. Think about who's benefiting from the destruction of our planet. It's weapons manufacturers more than anything else, and the financial institutions that are in bed with them. Who else benefits from the complete annihilation of entire regions of the world in the Middle East, for example? It's weapons manufacturers who have a dominant ear, or a dominant voice rather, in the ear of all presidential administrations, Republican or Democrat. So there doesn't seem to be a difference there. So I could easily see this being spun in a way that is terrible for humanity, but really good for the pockets of those groups that are in charge of that are responsible for making weapons. It's tremendous business for them.
Well,
and then, it also for control over the population, obviously.
And what would it do? Remember back McCarthyism and communism and what it did? You know what I mean? What would it do? I mean, we can't even get along with one another. How are we supposed to be able to accept the fact that there might be something else among us that's affecting us? And maybe that's why they don't want to announce themselves, number one. And number two, they're still waiting for us to realize, stop spending $2 trillion a year to kill each other and start spending $2 trillion a year on how we can survive and make the world livable for everyone, not just
clearly.
for you.
From a grander perspective, anyone observing us right now has got to, if they have rationality in their mind, and if they, have any intelligence, they have to be marveling at how ridiculously stupid our global policy is. That we're doing exactly what we're doing, spending all of our resources to destroy each other and this world. It does make no sense from any kind of logical point of view. And yet here we are doing it. We have a system that's just been hijacked so severely, whether by human or non-human groups, for their own personal enrichment, for their own personal gain. And honestly, there's no hope for us as a civilization, as a species, unless we get control over those groups that are running us right into the ground and below. We're just destroying ourselves, and we have to find a way of getting control. And the only way to do it is by reclaiming the truth and by getting the truth out there. Whatever that is.
Do you think that's why Podesta is working so hard to keep dropping these pieces to get the reporting world to ask Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, what do you really know about UFOs and ETs?
I would like to think so. I'm a little skeptical. I look at, and I say this not as a Republican, not as a Democrat, but I think that Hillary Clinton is as much of a neocon empire warrior as Dick Cheney. There's really no difference. I think she's just as dishonest as Dick Cheney. They have the exact same policy in almost everything I can think of, and I don't think that Hillary Clinton is any more likely to be a disclosure president than anyone else. A lot of people think that she would be. I don't. Whether John Podesta himself has this kind of great love for the truth and a belief in humanity, I would like to believe that. If that's the case, I don't really know what he knows. Does he actually know? Has he gotten confirmation, or does he just get rumors that have come across his desk in his career? If it's only rumors, then he's not going to be a particularly effective tool for disclosure. If he does know something that he can confirm, he could be effective. So maybe, let's say he doesn't have true confirmation, but he has near confirmation, then that might explain some of the things that he's been doing, that is trying to get other people to come out with it. That would be my guess. He was
so involved in what's called the Lawrence Rockefeller Initiative,
right,
behind the scenes then during the Bill Clinton administration, and as Grant Cameron articulated for us so well on Phenomenon Radio not long ago, that Bill Clinton has been given the classified briefing after he signed his oath to become president of the United States. I think this is true, that Grant is making this wonderful point. The presidents have been given briefings, but they have been made to sign the oaths that they will never talk till their grave about any of this material. So all they can do is signal. And that, as Grant said, Bill Clinton tried very hard to get the Air Force to admit the truth about Roswell. And instead, what did they do? They came out with that silly 2-part report.
Oh, yeah.
Ending with the wooden dummies.
Completely obstructed the whole investigation.
And that CBS and other networks at least finally did some investigation on that and confirmed there were no wooden dummies ever dropped in 47. It didn't happen until 54. And right. Maureen Dowd at the New York Times wrote a brilliant column when that silly Air Force report came out. And what was the title of her column? We Are Not Alone. And she was basically saying, this is ridiculous. The truth is, we're not alone. Government, tell us the truth.
Well, we need that, not because we expect the government to act like a parent figure to us, but because the government is responsive to us. We are the parent in that sense, and we want our spoiled child, the government, to do what it's supposed to do and work for the people. This is the attitude that people need to remember. You know, the government is not our parent. The government is not our protector. We are the active agents here, and we need to get control back over the institutions of power that exist in this society and get it working for us, which is what it's supposed to have been like all along, and it hasn't been like this for a long, long time.
But, Rich, how do we do that when the CIA right now is going to, or is trying to force Apple to give a backdoor on this issue?
Oh, my God.
Terrorists. And
we could talk about this for another hour. I've been all over this.
Of the mountain time, because right now Apple and the others that are joining Apple are saying privacy and the right to privacy in the United States government of by and for the people should be paramount. CIA is arguing, and the intel agencies are coming behind Brennan and saying we deserve to have that backdoor in order to protect you.
It is the most ridiculous. Snowden put out a tweet recently, and he was right on spot. He said, think about how, I'm paraphrasing, how screwed up we are that we're relying on a corporation, Apple, to protect us from the government.
Yeah, and that's did you guys hear the latest today? And it's actually the FBI, not the CIA. just to correct that. Now they've admitted that it's not just that one phone, that there's across the country different agencies are pushing Apple. So there's over 300 devices that the government now wants them to open up, and that's changing the paradigm on the TV today.
It would be a catastrophe. It would be a catastrophe for us if Apple were to allow the FBI or any government agency.
But if you can believe this or not, even Fox today, after that leaked out today, even Fox says no, that this has got to stop. So maybe we are starting down the right path.
Yeah, that's right. The way to stop this, honestly, is only through public anger, public fury, and that will only happen, I think, through continued leaks of important information. That includes getting information that's already out in a public way, like the Condon Report, for example, and like a lot of the other factual data that we have in this phenomenon and everything else. It's how can we overcome an intransigent, overwhelming 24/7 propaganda establishment? That's the problem, but we're David and they're Goliath, and we got to find a way to take them down.
Well, at least, Richard, and I hate to say this, we're out of time, but at least your show and Phenomena is trying to do that, and there's other shows out there doing the same. And everybody out there, I want you to look into coming to Eureka Springs, because Richard, Linda, and I, and many others will be there. And it should be a good time, and there should be some good information passed on.
And Earthfiles.com is always trying daily to bring some kind of information about this. And Richard, I cannot thank you enough for sharing what I think have been 2 hours of really, truly important discussion on what the truth is out there behind the matrix.
It is always a pleasure for me to talk with both of you, Linda and John. I really enjoy it very much. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, Richard. We really appreciate it.
Next week on Phenomenon Radio, John and Linda welcome back former Ministry of Defense head of the UFO Project, Nick Pope. For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and our very special guest, Richard Dolan, I'm Race Hobbs. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.